The first thing Jacob noticed wasn't her smile. It was the sadness she tried so hard to hide. At first glance, the evening looked ordinary. A quiet Italian restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop in a small Ohio town. Candlelight flickered gently against the stone walls. Soft music floated through the air. And outside the windows, the late autumn wind carried fallen leaves down the sidewalk. It was the kind of place where people usually came to celebrate anniversaries or whisper promises about the future. But tonight, it was just two strangers meeting for the first time. Jacob had agreed to the blind date reluctantly. At 36, his life had settled into a quiet routine of work, weekend hikes, and evenings spent alone with takeout and old movies. A coworker had insisted he meet someone named Sarah, claiming they would get along perfectly. He hadn't expected much. Sarah arrived wearing a simple navy dress, her long hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She looked kind, composed, and polite in the way people often look when they're trying not to seem nervous. From across the table, she thanked the waiter softly and folded her hands near the candle, as if she were trying to stay grounded in the moment. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. They talked about harmless things, traffic, the weather, how unpredictable Midwest winters had become. Sarah mentioned she worked part-time at a local library. Jacob talked about his job designing bridges for the county. The conversation moved gently, like two people carefully stepping across a frozen lake. And yet something about her eyes kept pulling his attention back. They were beautiful, a deep shade of hazel that caught the candlelight, but there was something heavy behind them. Not just tiredness, not the ordinary exhaustion of work or stress. It was the kind of sadness that sits quietly inside someone, like a storm waiting behind closed doors. Have you ever looked at someone and felt that before? That strange moment when you realize a person sitting right in front of you is carrying more pain than they are willing to show. And you wonder, if you were in their place, would you be strong enough to hide it too? Jacob tried to focus on the conversation, but the feeling lingered. Sarah smiled politely when he spoke, but sometimes her expression slipped for half a second, and her gaze drifted toward the window like someone remembering something they wished they could forget. Halfway through dinner, while the waiter cleared their plates, Jacob noticed her fingers gently tracing the edge of the tablecloth. It wasn't nervousness. It was almost like she was holding herself together. And suddenly he couldn't ignore it anymore. Instead of asking another safe question about work or hobbies, he looked at her quietly for a moment. Then he said something simple, not prying, not demanding, just honest. He told her that sometimes people pretend they're okay when they're really not. For a moment, Sarah froze. The candle between them flickered as if the room itself had gone still. She looked down at her hands and took a slow breath. The restaurant noise around them faded into a distant blur of clinking glasses and quiet laughter from other tables. When she finally lifted her eyes again, they were glistening. Sarah had lost her husband 2 years earlier. His name had been Michael. He had been a firefighter in Columbus, the kind of man who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. One winter night during a warehouse fire, the roof collapsed before his team could escape. She had been 29. Since that night, her life had slowly shrunk into something quieter, smaller, safer. The world that once felt full of possibility now felt unpredictable and fragile. She kept busy with work at the library, volunteering occasionally, visiting her parents on Sundays. But she avoided anything that resembled the life she used to have. Dating had felt impossible. Even agreeing to tonight had taken months of persuasion from friends who believed she deserved another chance at happiness. But sitting there across from Jacob, she admitted something she hadn't told anyone else. Part of her felt guilty for even trying, as if moving forward meant leaving Michael behind. Her voice never broke into dramatic tears. Instead, the sadness came out slowly, like a quiet river that had been flowing underneath everything for years. Jacob listened without interrupting. He didn't offer advice or comforting cliches, because the truth was he understood more than she realized. 4 years earlier, Jacob's younger sister had died in a car accident on an icy highway outside Dayton. She had been only 24. The loss had carved a deep emptiness into his life, one that time had softened but never erased. Grief, he had learned, didn't disappear. It simply became part of you. The two of them sat there for a long moment, not as strangers anymore, but as two people who understood the quiet language of loss. Outside, the wind pushed another swirl of leaves down the street. Inside the restaurant, the candle between them burned steadily. Something had shifted. The evening no longer felt like a blind date. It felt like two lives intersecting at exactly the moment they both needed someone to understand. They didn't suddenly become joyful. The sadness didn't magically disappear, but the weight in the air felt lighter. Sarah laughed softly at something Jacob said about his failed attempt at learning guitar during the pandemic. Jacob admitted he had once burned an entire Thanksgiving turkey and ordered pizza instead. For the first time that night, the sadness in her eyes loosened just a little. Not gone, but softer, like the first hint of sunrise after a very long night. By the time they stepped outside the restaurant, the cold evening air wrapped around them gently. The streetlights reflected off the damp pavement, and somewhere nearby a car radio played an old country song. Neither of them rushed to say goodbye. They stood there for a moment, two people who had walked into dinner expecting small talk and polite smiles, and instead found something unexpectedly real. Not romance, not yet, but something more important: understanding. Hope doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears quietly, sitting across a candlelit table, looking back at you with sad eyes that slowly begin to heal. Before the story ends, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever met someone who changed your life simply by understanding your pain? And if this story touched your heart even a little, please consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who might need hope today, and subscribing for more stories that remind us how powerful kindness and second chances can truly be. Red.